What? Oh, okay. Well, today we're going to do something a little different. We're going to talk about the feast of Yom Kippurim. That's the biblical name. I know these days they call it Yom Kippur, Yom Kippur, whatever. Now they call it Yom Kippur. But biblically speaking, it's not Yom Kippur. It's Yom Kippurim. It's in plural, not singular. So, anywho, we're going to talk about that and walk through that. But this is going to be very Christianish. I think you Jews really need to listen to this because I'm always going to take it back to Judaism, where this comes from and what it relates to. That's what it really means. Um, but it'll be pretty Christiany, I guess. So that thing was rolling down. I didn't even know it. The first question that I always ask every year is, why would we celebrate the day of covering? Because Kippurim, Kippur, that's a covering. It's like putting a blanket over you. You know, it was just putting a shirt on as a covering, putting a kippah on your head as a covering, putting a cap, a hat, sombrero, it doesn't matter. That's a covering. If you have a roof over your house or your front porch, even that's a covering. It's something that covers, right? Something that shades, if you will. And that word can go as far as doing things undercover, like a spy, because you're doing it secretively. That's not what's happening here on this, of course, but there's a lot of different uses for that particular word. But you got to ask, why do we celebrate a day of covering? Now, some people call it a day of atonement. And, well, what I understand atonement to be from Christianity does not line up with the Bible at all. It does tend to line up with a lot of what the sages wrote from, say, the 1200s this way, and has become. Jews have no idea just how Christian they are. They just don't. Unless you study where did Rashi get his stuff? Oh, well, he got it from Sifrei and in the Talmud. No, he didn't. No, he didn't. He got it from the Catholics. A lot of what Judaism does today was literally stolen from the Catholics. And the Catholics stole it from the Jews of a much earlier period. So there's a lot of connection in there with the actual Bible, but most of it is not. So they've gotten to the point now where their idea of atonement is Christianized. It's not biblical because this is a covering of some sort. It's not an atonement. So why then are we celebrating a day of atonement after we just celebrated the return of our King? Think about that. We just last week celebrated, what's that called? Teruah, the Feast of Noise, right? And it's all about the return of your groom, or you could look at it as the return of, or the arrival, not necessarily return, but the arrival of your kinsman redeemer, right? So why would we then, after having that kind of a celebration, turn around and start worrying about forgiveness? Is it because for the Christians, is it because Jesus didn't come last year, so now we're celebrating that maybe he'll come next year? I mean, but what then is it for the Jews? Oh, well, God said we had to do it every year. Okay. That's kind of an answer was never good enough for me. Is it possible that we are celebrating what happened on the day that we entered into the consummation phase of our marriage? Listen carefully, Jews, with our Moshiach? That sounds very Christian, doesn't it? But stop and think. What happened in the second chapter of Hosea? God divorced his people. I think that most Jews don't get this. If God divorces his people, they're not his people. God came right out and said that. They are not my people. I am not their God. She is not my wife. Speaking of every Jew alive, she is not my wife, and I am not her husband. Boom. End of it. No more covenant. No more protection from God. And for that matter, no more land of Israel, biblically speaking, actually belonging to the Jewish people. So, isn't this a celebration of Mashiach coming to reestablish his covenant with his people? Yeah. Shake your head, yes, Jews. That's exactly what this is. So, if you're a Christian, and you might be asking yourself, well, did it have something to do with Jesus dying on the cross? Maybe. I mean, Yeshua, I hate saying Jesus, there was no such person as Jesus in the second century. We didn't have a J or the J sound. No language did. We still don't have one in Hebrew. There never was a person named Jesus. The man that everybody's calling Jesus, his name was Yeshua. It was not Yehoshua, Yeshayahu. Not, or no, that's not. That's how do they do that? It's they try to mix God's formal name with Yeshua. Forget how they do that. No, I'm saying Isaiah and Jeremiah is what's coming out instead of. Anyway, I don't remember, but the Messianics are trying. Some of them are trying to put those two names together. It's none of that. His name was Yeshua, simply Yeshua. So let's say, for the sake of argument, that he really was the Mashiach. Well, what would that mean to a Torah thumping Jew like me? Well, that would mean the sin of the world, as it's called in the New Testament. It was called that because that's what we Jews called it back then. We called it the sin of the world because we were separated from God because of the Jews committing Torah rebellion. We were not living according to God's law. Just like God said, we were spit out of our land. We wound up in exile from our land and slavery on top of that because the land spit us out just like God said it would. So now we have no covenant, but we did have the promise that God would reestablish that covenant. And if we know anything about our law, about our Hebrew Bible, we know that God said, I am Yahweh. He used his own name. And other than me, there is no salvation. No Mashiach. Instead of Mashiach, no Mashiach. No salvation. What should that tell every Jew? That should tell every Jew that when Mashiach comes, that will be a physical manifestation of God Almighty. Now, the prophet said, at least one of them, he's pretty popular. He said that, behold, a child is born, a son is given, and the government will be on his shoulders. And it winds up at the end saying, a child, a human being will be born, And he will be called Wonderful Counselor and stuff like that. And then it says he'll be called Almighty God, Everlasting Father. If you're Jewish, that should ring a bell to you. And if you're Christian, it should certainly ring a bell, because it's in both sides of the book, right? It's in the Christian side, it's in the Jewish side. We should know, if from nothing else, those two verses should have told us that when Mashiach comes, it would be a physical manifestation of God Almighty. Now, if Mashiach has not come, the Jews have no claim on Yisrael at all. If he has not come, then they cannot claim that God helped them to reestablish Yisrael. And there are some Jews, religious Jews, who say that God did not. The Jews did it all on their own. But those who actually fought the war talk about all the miracles that went on around them. They're sure God helped them. Well, that's not possible unless Mashiach actually came. Is it possible that Mashiach came, that God came in human flesh? He was born as a child, just like the prophet said he would, that he did his work, and maybe we didn't get what that meant. All right. I have a verse I want to go through here. It's Vaikra, chapter 23, verse 27. It says, Ach be'asor lachodesh ha-shevi'im. Hazeh yom ha-kippurim hu nikra kodesh yiyeh lachem vi'i nitem etna shotechem vehikravtem ishe la Yahweh. Was that clear enough for everyone to understand every syllable? That's exactly what I was going for. I hope I pulled it off. Surely, certainly, there can be no doubt. That's what that first word means. Be'asor. In the 10th. La Chodesh, so in the 10th month, the 10th new moon. It's actually new moon, so, but in English, we generally say month. Ha-shevi'im, so it's the 7th. Hazeh, this. Literally, we just say this in English generally. Yom, 7th day. Ha-kippurim, the coverings. The coverings, not the cover, the coverings. So if it is somehow atonement, then it's atonements. If it is redemption, it is redemptions. If it is covering, it is very obviously coverings. Get what I'm going for here? It's plural. It is from the root kafar, which is to cover over. Whence a covering? To overspread with anything, as with pitch, like on a roof in the olden days, to cover sin. To cover sin, which of course in the English text says, i.e. to pardon. Really? Anyway. So to put it plainly, we call it Yom Kippur, or Yom Kippur, as I hear more often than not, but it's actually Yom Kippurim. It is the day of coverings. This is who, let's hear it, Mikra. That's they'll say that's a convocation. It's calling a group of people together. It's to announce an assembly but not that you're okay on the 14th. We're going to have an assembly. No, it's time to start. But everybody take their seats and shut up and let us get started. You know, this is that calling. You know what I'm saying is we're getting ready to start right here. And it says Kodesh. So this is holy. It is set aside for God. It's not set aside for us. It is set aside for God. It's something that will always be done. And generally speaking, will pretty much be done the same way, though some change is always acceptable. I mean, the oil in the oil lamps is holy, right? In the temple, but it burns down and then you got to put more in it. So the amount of oil changes. Stuff changes even when it's a permanent thing, right? But this is of purity, cleanliness. This is of what is right according to God. That's what to be holy and pure indicates when we are getting those words from the Bible. Yiyeh, it will be lachem, to you, ve'initem. That's to bestow labor upon anyone. Oh, it's going to be a day of hard labor. To exercise oneself to anything, meaning that you're going to have to do something. You got to pay attention to it. You got to turn your mind to it. To till the ground, to bring the earth into cultivation. Yeah, that's what this word means, right? Oh, so we got to go out and plant the field? No. This is to humble oneself. Remember, this is coming from a language, a primitive language, not a modern language. So one word has a whole lot of different uses, but there's an image behind the root of every word, and that image has to come forth. So if we look inside ourselves and we cultivate, we rip up all of the mask that everybody wears, the trying to be all spiritual and holy and perfect in front of everybody for 1 hour every week. We're tearing away all of that stuff. We're tearing away all of that facade that we put up, tearing away all the everything and looking deep inside our own heart. You're not doing this to somebody else. You're doing it to you. And it's very important. This is self-reflection, but it's the real deal. If they used to tell us, look in the mirror, right? Well, some people look in the mirror and they're like, oh, that's so pretty. No, it's not. This is not what we're talking about. We're talking about looking in that mirror and seeing what's past the facade. Knowing all that deep, dark, secretive stuff. This is time for us to look at that. Because the next word is nafshotechem. That's your soul. You're cultivating, you're ripping and tearing away at your soul. The soul, of course, is the breath of life, the anima that gives life. They say all that sort of thing, but it's the mind as the seat of the senses, affections, and various emotions. It's the you that lives on after your body dies. It's the real you. That's what we're supposed to be looking deep inside of. Our next word is vehikravtem. This is to draw near. This is to approach someone or something. If I'm 50 yards away from the front door of my house and I'm walking with the purpose of going into my house, I'm approaching my house, right? It's draw near. Then it says, Ish. Ish. You're drawing near. No, we haven't clarified what we're drawing near to, but we can probably guess as when they use this word, especially they use this word for making sacrifice to God. It's the same word, but we're approaching, and this is Ish. So if it turns out that our next word happens to be the name of God, I don't want to give it away, but that's what it is. Now, if it turns out to be that, which it is, then the rule here is that when you're speaking of a person or even of God himself in human terms, let's put it that way. You're saying God touched me. God heard me. He heard my cry. He heard my prayer, right? You're speaking in human terms under that circumstance. Then Esh, instead of it being fire, it becomes passion. You're drawing near with passion. And then it says, La Yahweh. You're drawing near with passion to the one and only God. And it gives his name. So here's my translation. Surely on the 10th day of the 7th new moon, the 7th month, there will be a day of coverings. It will be a sacred assembly, a time to tear into, cultivate, and humble your souls, drawing near and offering passion to Yahweh. So, how do you do that? Well, there's a description given by one of the prophets, he who hides under the shadow of the wing to be covered. You remember the story of Ruth when Boaz wakes up and realizes somebody's at his feet. He says, Mata, who you, literally who you, who are you is how we would say it in English. What does she ask him to do? Cover me. Our word today, cover me with your wing. This thing, your talit, the thing you're laying under. Lift your sheet, if you will, your blanket. Let me cuddle in there and cover me. That is exactly what she was saying to him. And that's exactly what God's telling us we're supposed to do on this holiday. Go in and get underneath the blanket of God Almighty. It's a celebration of the day that we enter in to Nisuin, into the consummation phase of marriage with God, with our Redeemer who came back and paid that price, made that sacrifice so that God's people, his children, could be returned to that covenant. Not some new covenant, because Yirmiyahu clearly said new sacrifice. And if you translate the words in the New Testament properly, they also say new sacrifice, not new covenant. That's what we're celebrating. So if you believe that God has not done what the prophet said he would do, when the prophet said he would do it, then you also believe that Yirmiyahu and Daniel are false prophets, at the very least. You also believe Moshe was a false prophet. Yeah, you do. Moshe said that Yahweh would come. You know why most Jews don't know that? Because they don't read what Moshe actually said. Instead, they get all this commentary about, oh, well, even though Moshe said Yahweh himself would come and obey him when he does, there would be one that would come among you, one that would be born among the Jews who would come. And when he comes, it'll be Yahweh, you should obey him. That's exactly what that Hebrew text says. But we're all told, no, it doesn't. We're going to move the thinking around here and put Yahweh first, even though he's not at the first of the sentence where he would need to be for it to say what they translate it to say. Look at the Hebrew. Look that up and tell me that, those of you who can read Hebrew, tell me that that's not Moshe telling us that Yahweh would be born among the Jews and would, when he came, we should obey him. Tell me that's not what he's saying, and I'll tell you, you don't know a thing about biblical Hebrew. That's exactly what Moshe said. And you believe that he didn't know what he was talking about. You believe that Daniel and Yirmiyahu had no idea what they were talking about, because those two gave the exact time that God would show up like that, the exact time that he would be cut off from the land. In other words, the exact time that he would die. All of it lines up with the exact moment Yeshua was born, the exact moment that he died. And in fact, if in Daniel especially, he gives you the exact moment that the temple would be destroyed, 70 CE. Just do the math. It's there. And if you don't believe Yeshua was the one, you believe that all of the prophets of old are false prophets. My question to you is, why do you even bother calling yourself a Jew? I know that sounds harsh, but this is what we're celebrating. The fact that God kept his word. He showed up exactly when Daniel and Yirmiyahu said he would. He died exactly when Daniel and Yirmiyahu said he would. The temple was destroyed exactly when Daniel said it would be. It all happened. And because of that, our Redeemer came. He paid the price to set us back in right standing with our God. And yes, we have every right to say Yisrael belongs to the Jews and no one else. No one has the right to tell anyone that the Jews should be given up part of that land. No one. God gave that to his people, and he paid a horrific price in order to set them back on the right path, to give them back the land. Oh, I'm sorry. I need a moment here. I stirred up the There was a letter. The Christians call it the Book of Hebrews. It's not a book. It was a letter. And who it was written by is pretty questionable. We know that it was a follower of Yeshua. Otherwise, wouldn't have been any reason for someone else to write it. Some people try to say it was Luke. No, it wasn't. But the writing style is very similar. Of course it is. It's a very Jewish writing style. Why would you be surprised by that? Anyway, in that letter, in chapter 9, the writer said, "For where there is a covenant, death is necessary to establish the testator. And people try to connect that with stuff going on in the Western world. Okay, so somebody dies and the testator comes in and I don't think I'm going to get over this. And I didn't bring my pills. My brain was telling me all morning long I should bring them, but I felt fine. I thought, oh, no, I don't need to do that. Anyway, it says, the next verse says, for a covenant is enforced upon death. Otherwise, it has no strength while the testator is alive. You're going to have to. They're in my pants pocket. The writer is not telling us that the Jews made wills, and upon their death, the testator of the will would enforce it. That's the Western world. That's not the biblical world. The writer is simply telling us that a covenant was not entered into until an animal was sacrificed. That's all he's saying. He goes on. Therefore, without blood, initiation could not begin. See, we're talking about starting of a covenant, not what happens after somebody dies, because the death is the animal, the sacrifice. Well, for when all the commandments had been proclaimed according to the Torah by Moshe to all the people, he took the blood of calves with water and scarlet wool and hyssop, sprinkling both the scroll and all the people. Does that sound familiar? It ought to. And Moshe took the blood and sprinkled the people, because his next verse is actually a quote of what he just said. He summed it up. Here's the quote, verse 20. And Moshe took the blood and sprinkled the people and said, behold, the blood of the covenant which Yahweh cut with you concerning all these words. It's funny. He's taking you right back to Shemot, to Exodus, and somehow you believe this book is about something new? I'll never understand it. Then he says in verse 21, and also the Mishkan, that's the tabernacle, and all the vessels of service likewise he sprinkled with the blood. And almost everything is purified by blood according to the Torah. And without the shedding of blood, there is no, and what do you get? Remission of sin. There is no forgiveness. Really? There's no covering. Therefore, it was necessary that the pattern of things in the heavens should be purified with these, but the heavenly with better sacrifices than these. Not covenants, sacrifices. For the Mashiach is not entered into the Kodesh HaKadashim. These days they call that the Holy of Holies. It's actually literally that's holy, the holies. So Holy of Holies is close enough. Made with human hands. Okay, so it's for the Mashiach is not entered into the Holy of Holies that was made with human hands. That's the temple, at least the one in the temple. Figures of the true. I've got water. Just toss the bottle at, or the little bottle. Okay. Thanks. Thank you, Donna. Where was I? For the Mashiach is not entered into the Holy of Holies made with human hands, figures of the true, but into the heavens itself, the presence of God now manifest for us. And that's an allusion to what Moshe said. He said, for us. Nor that he should repeatedly offer himself as the Kohen Hagadol, entering into the Kodesh HaKadashim yearly with blood of others. That's the way it was in the temple made with human hands. Otherwise, he must repeatedly suffer from the foundation of the world. Now he has appeared once in the end of the world to put away sin, and he did use the word for sin, by the sacrifice of himself. And I've already talked about the fact that Moshe, all the way through the rest of the prophets, said God would show up as a human being. And inasmuch as it is appointed to men once to die, but after is judgment. Punishment or reward, it's going to be one or the other, right? Or maybe a combination of both, who knows? Thus also the Mashiach was once offered to bear the sins of many. He's saying God's only going to do this once. For this reason, afterwards shall he appear to those without sin who bind together with him. How are you without sin if you have no covenant? That's not even possible. The only way you can have sin is if you have a covenant and you're breaking it. Sin is Torah rebellion. Yochanan ben Zakkai said that. He said, everyone who commits sin is also in violation of the Torah, because sin is Torah rebellion. Real simple. In Romans, Shaul ben Gamliel said, for all have sinned and come short of the glory of God. Are we starting to get the idea maybe what the glory of God is? If you sin, you come short of it. Fall way short of it. I think I have a translation here somewhere. For all have transgressed the Torah, all have sinned. They've all transgressed the Torah and fall short of God's glory. The works of Torah brings men to the knowledge of sin. That is for sure. At least it should, or at least learning the works and living them out. That should bring you to the knowledge of what sin is and what it is not. We can only truly know what sin is and what it is not by learning the Torah, right? I mean, you can know that sin is Torah rebellion, but if you don't know what the Torah says, then you don't know if you're rebelling against it or not. So my point is, you need to learn the Torah, right? When we learn the law and apply it to our lives, then and only then can our eyes begin to open to the knowledge of sin. Once our eyes truly become open to what sin is and what it is not, we are able to choose between sin and death, life and death. We can choose between them. We can either choose to obey God, thus we are those who choose, or we can choose not to. doing, let's say, the do's and not doing the don'ts of Torah, that won't save us, because it's only half the equation. And yes, it is half the equation. Living according to God's law is half the equation. Once we have a true knowledge of sin, what it is, what it isn't, if we choose life, in other words, we choose to live according to God's law, and the blood of Mashiach, the sacrifice of Mashiach, there's going to be blood, right? The sacrifice of Mashiach covers our sin. And only then can our soul be saved. So what does it take for our Redeemer, our groom, our estranged husband? I mean, the Bible uses all those terminologies for God. What does it take for, let's just call it groom, to find blood on the wedding chuppah? Especially if his bride has been unfaithful. And given the fact that God divorced his people, us, his bride was unfaithful, right? She can no longer supply the blood needed, can she? Are you picking up what I'm putting down here? God had to supply the blood. God did. I hope I have enough time, but I want to read something that was written by Dr. Truman Davis. He studied the physical effects of crucifixion and describes it as follows. The unnatural position made every moment painful. The lacerated veins and crushed tendons throbbed with incessant anguish. The wounds inflamed by exposure gradually gangrened. The arteries, especially at the head and stomach, became swollen and oppressed with surcharged blood. And while each variety of misery went on gradually increasing, there was added to them the intolerable pain of burning and raging thirst. As the arms fatigued, great waves of cramps swept over the muscles, knotting them in deep, relentless, throbbing pain. With these cramps comes the inability to push himself upward. Hanging by his arms, the pectoral muscles are paralyzed and the intercostal muscles are unable to act. Air can be drawn into the lungs, but cannot be exhaled. Yeshua fights to raise himself in order to get even one short breath. Finally, carbon dioxide builds up in the lungs and in the bloodstream, and the cramps partially subside. Spasmodically, he is able to push himself upwards to exhale and bring in the life-giving oxygen. But hours of this limitless pain, cycles of twisting, joint-rending cramps, intermittent partial asphyxiation, searing pain as tissue is torn from his lacerated back as he moves up and down against the rough timber. Then another agony begins, a deep crushing pain in the chest as the pericardium slowly fills with serum and begins to compress the heart. It is now almost over. The loss of tissue fluid has reached a critical level. The compressed heart is struggling to pump heavy, thick, sluggish blood into the tissues. The tortured lungs are making a frantic effort to gasp in small gulps of air. The markedly dehydrated tissue send their flood of stimuli to the brain. Once strength or feeling in the legs was gone, the victim would be unable to push up in order to breathe, and death would occur quickly. It's easy to understand for myself as a Jew why Christians hear this and want to follow Jesus. I can even kind of understand why a Jew would hear this and realize Yeshua had to have been the one promised by Moshe himself, by Hosea, Yirmiyahu, Yeshayahu, Daniel, David, Shlomo. But as a Jew, realizing that all of that connects to the prophets and what they said, it makes me realize that our God reigns. The sin that our fathers committed have been covered. That it's not time to follow the nonsense of Christianity. It's time to follow the covenant that God paid this price for. I'm going to have to stop here. But next Friday night, 7 p.m. Central, we'll be back online. And we'll talk about the other side of this, the fact that this is also our day of judgment. Shalom, shalom, you guys.
The blessing, Be'ivrit. Yevarecha Yahweh v'yish merecha. Ya'er Yahweh panai v'lecha v'hunecha. Yisa Yahweh panai v'lecha v'yasim lecha shalom. And in English, may Yahweh cause you to lie down so that you may rest. May he touch and caress you. May he prepare you for what is ahead. May he watch over you. May he keep you from harm. May he cause goodness to grow in you and take away the bad. May he arrange your life and cause you to flourish. May he cheer you up and gladden your heart. May he cause his light to shine through you. May he show you tenderness, favor, and love in his presence. May he show you kindness and be delicate towards you. May he show you his generosity, mercy, compassion, and desire for you as it comes forth from the depths of his soul. May he lift you out of your pit and deliver you from the things that hold you prisoner. May he draw you to his chest and cast his eyes on yours. May he show you his love and desire for you as he cradles you in his arms. May he bear your punishment and pardon you of your sin. May he take you for his bride. May he establish a foundation in you. May he place his name on your heart and mind and make your body his temple. May you be his treasure. May you always be on his mind. May he draw you near and comfort you when you are afraid. May he assure you there is nothing to fear because he is with you. May you and all that concerns you be at peace because he is your friend. Amen.